It's a new year, and that means it's time to set some goals. Now, one goal you can easily achieve and not give up after a few weeks is getting your student involved in the spring trimester of Space Club and the Wolfpack CubeSat development team. We work with students from all over the country, middle through college level, from designing, building, and launching satellites to presenting at international conferences. Your student can specialize in engineering, policy, and even entrepreneurship. Check out our website at aerospacehigh.org. That's aerospacehigh.org. Or check out the show notes for more information. And let's go to space again this year. Welcome back, Kevin. I mean, it's been a while since we've actually done a podcast. In fact, I know we've been talking about bringing these back for a while, but, we had some issues with Spotify and so forth. So I'm really excited that it's January. It's a whole new year. It's 2025, and it's the perfect time to get the podcast back underway. Why don't you start off today by sharing some highlights of all the incredible work that, the students have been doing?
Well, last year was a very productive year for the Wolfpack, incredibly productive. First of all, the students and I presented, I think, about 34 papers in 6 countries. Some of the really big highlights we're especially proud of is that we raised all the funds we needed to pay off our WolfSat-1 payload engineering model, the flight hardware, the fast bus, and our launch is covered by Firefly Aerospace. So that was a big deal to pay that off. We're especially thankful that Stiles Nicholson Foundation supported us through a matching opportunity. So we raised half of that.
Well, so let's take that. That's a big deal. So let's talk for a minute. We may have some new listeners or whatever, but this was a satellite that was in the making for how long?
We probably started pitching the idea back in 2021.
And so for a new listener, it generally takes 3 years from the idea of once a proposal is made from it to actually get to launch?
Well, we could do it in 2.5 years. The problem was we could not obtain funding. So the reason that we went over the top this year and were successful is that we won a national competition through Firefly. They chose 3 payloads in the United States, and we were one of the 3. The other 2 are universities. So having the free ride immediately cut our costs in half. Mm-hmm. And then we did a fundraising event with our students, and Stiles matched the half that we had to raise for all the hardware.
So that one hasn't been launched yet, the one that you're talking of now, right? Because I know that you did also have one launched last year. I believe it was the FlipSat finally launched, right?
Yes, we actually integrated it in 2023, and then we had to wait. There were a lot of factors that were unrelated to us with the launch, the integrator and the hardware that was sitting on top of the Falcon 9. But this mission in August that launched, that carried FlipSat, was called Transporter 11. It launched out of Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. FlipSat is part of the Troop mission, and it is in a sun synchronous orbit, and we are currently getting telemetry packets from that mission.
And that was the student, Theodore Oying, who also just recently went to Princeton, I believe, and that was what his focus, he started all the way back in middle school. So yeah, that's really impressive. So now this next one that, you've now got funded, is there a timeline for when you're thinking that this may be actually built, the payload, and when you're hoping it might launch?
Well, we're sort of shooting for an integration in the 4th quarter. So the launch will be in the 4th quarter of this year or afterwards. So one of the big accomplishments this past year with respect to that mission is that we partnered with a lab at my alma mater at North Carolina State University. Dr. Nathan Crook runs a chemical and biomolecular engineering lab there in the School of Engineering. And their lab is actually modifying a strain of bacteria to make it a little more hardy for us to be able to fly in space. So that was another one of our big accomplishments this summer.
All right, so that's really impressive to be thinking that now this is the number 4, right, for satellites that you'll have successfully launched. Yeah, so all right, so tell us more. In addition to building satellites, you mentioned some conferences and things too. What, give us some more.
Well, the students presented in COSPAR in Busan, South Korea. They presented at the International Astronautical Congress in Milan, Italy. I attended conferences in Abu Dhabi, and I went to Doha and Geneva, which one of the highlights there was going and meeting with CERN, some scientists at CERN that are willing to give us some hardware that could become payloads and CubeSats in the future. And we kicked off the CubeSat team we're working with and helping to build in Switzerland at a school called Eglon, and their satellite will be Eglon Sat 1, which will fly, in the next year or so. And then finally, another big highlight of the year is we implemented a program with Palm Beach State College. We did several weeks of summer in the Stratosphere camps where a lot of Wolfpack kids attended and volunteered. And the money which helped subsidize the camps was a direct result of our successful state legislature appropriation request.
Great, right? But I think that we're kind of skimming over some of these pretty big achievements. I'd like to go back for a minute, if I could, to the conferences. I know that in particularly outreach, you said from these conferences where the students were attending that you had also attended some on your own, but I believe you also had students present in Scotland, right, at a Pocket Cube conference. And I know that that's something that you will be continuing to do with some students who are continuing their research there. But you also have this kind of outreach with these other countries now from conferences that you've gone to and beyond. So I know you mentioned Eglon, but you also, I think, have a school that you're working with through one of the Wolfpack students in Japan. Is that true?
Well, we've been in discussions with organizations in Japan, STEM organizations, and also I have an NDA or an MOU and an NDA with a Japanese rocket company.
Well, maybe tell our listeners in case they don't know what those acronyms are.
So an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement, and an MOU is a memorandum of understanding. So my intent, and we have a student, Kenan, and Kenan is actively helping us recruit and identify a school, teachers, and students in Tokyo that would be interested in being some of the first pre-college Japanese students to build a CubeSat. And then our aim is to put it on top of one of the new rockets being developed by a Japanese company, Interstellar Technologies, and then launch out of Japan. Likewise, I've recently been in meetings with some new friends I made from Korea, from Hanwha. They're another rocket company, and they develop orbital rockets as well. And the work that we do here with the Wolfpack is not really done in other countries, but it seems to be a good model to help get young people in this STEM pipeline. And so that is the focus.
So why aren't even schools in the United States really don't focus kind of like on the work that you're doing. That's one of the things that we've talked about a long time here. But why is that the case in other countries as well? Like, is it that the interest is not as high as the United States, or the money? Is it the curriculum thing, or what do you think are the biggest, issues when it comes to using the aerospace industry as an educational tool?
I'd say there are about 3 or 4 reasons. Number one, there are few educators that probably have the background and the connections with the industry that would allow them to see a pathway where they could have their kids build flight hardware. There are some, but they're not a lot. Second, in the US, one of the advantages we have is that the small satellites were really invented and really took off here. So the United States is probably still more than 50% of the world's market for CubeSats and small sats. So we have not only the home of the technology, it began here, we have actually access to rides. So there are lots of opportunities in the US for students to get rides, which is it's just as simple now as raising the money, buying your ride, and taking care of all the checklist items that you need to. But we have access, we have opportunity, the cost has come down some, and the fact that the CubeSat was invented here.
Well, as we're talking about conferences and then CubeSats in education, I mean, you had your third, I think, annual Small Sat Education Conference that you hosted this past year, and it was the biggest one ever, right?
Yes, in our third year, we again had a great keynote speaker, a current professor at the Naval Academy, an aerospace engineering professor, Ken Reitler. He was also an astronaut, went to space multiple times on the shuttle. And our conference, we saw over 540 attendees from 8 countries. And we also, I think we ended up with 36 presentations. We had 6 workshops. Again, the most popular workshop was the soldering workshop led by the Florida Atlantic University AIAA college group. They're called AXA, Aerospace Experimental Association. So they lead this really enjoyable soldering workshop that the kids enjoyed. We also had over 25 exhibitors. And we saw a good number of universities come from Princeton, from Georgia Tech, Embry-Riddle, all the great schools in Florida that have aerospace programs. And also the Naval Academy was well represented there as well.
I mean, yeah, I think it's really says a lot about the dedication that you have. I know you had a great team that you worked with to bring that together, but it was pretty impressive to see the numbers like that grow. And before we move on to the coming year, I know that you had also mentioned the outreach, the appropriations work, legislative work that had been going on. Do you want to kind of share with everybody, you know, like what has been done? You mentioned the camps, I believe, at PBSC, but because of that, we're moving forward with making some more contacts for appropriations in the coming year. Do you want to touch upon that now?
Yes, because that work overlaps between the 2 years. So we received funding from the 23 legislative session, and we spent that money last year. We have a really good working relationship with the workforce development folks at Palm Beach State College, Miss Deborah Gordon and Dr. Bob O'Day. There are 2 focal points. And subsequent to our June camps last year called Summer in the Stratosphere, where we launched high altitude balloons every week, we've been working to try to generate some language and think about the right path forward to increase access for students. And at the end of this year, we have finalized the program that we're pitching, which is called the Aerospace Career Experiences and Training Program, or ACET. And that is our current appropriations effort with the Florida legislature.
And the one that we tried for last time, I mean, we kind of, you know, the first experience was like, wow, all of a sudden we kind of fell into something that was funded. Second one, we found out, you know, we started learning a lot more about that process, only to not have it go through. I mean, you know, it has to get through the budget cuts, or rather the governor's cuts, regardless of how far it goes with the senator and representative. And then now we're trying that again. So, I mean, definitely some lessons learned in that area. So that's a lot to really catch everyone up on. But, you know, for a new listener, then you might know that essentially when you're a member of the Wolfpack, you're choosing from one of 3 lanes, right? You're choosing from engineering, which are the students who are building those CubeSats and dealing with the payloads. You might be dealing with the policy lane, which is exactly like what you just heard about, the legislative advocacy and the appropriations work. So some of our debate style students really enjoy that realm. And of course, there's the entrepreneurship one as well. And so all of these areas kind of come together with the fact that you've provided all these opportunities for students to really build impressive resumes. So I'm not sure how you could beat last year, but I imagine that you are already well underway to having an Aerospace Pack 2025. What are some things we should be thinking about coming up in this year?
Well, if we look at the year coming up, the month of January is quite busy already. In fact, one of our students presently is in Hawaii, presenting at the Hawaii International Conference on Education, an accepted paper. In a day or so, I will head to Orlando for the AIAA SciTech conference, where I will chair a session and run an educator workshop. And what's really important for the students is that we continue to develop the WolfSat-1 payload, and they are writing their abstracts and beginning their papers for the conferences that we intend to attend and present at later on this year. So January is really the writing season. February 1st is sort of the deadline we have to get papers into SmallSat, to COSPAR, and to IAC. And those are three of our very big conferences.
So let's talk briefly about like paper writing, right? Because that's one of the things that's always a real stretch, especially for newer students. How, and adults, right? They want to ask, how is it that kids, because you're working with students as young as middle school, right? How is it that they are able to get papers selected, considering this is technical writing and not just like a report?
So it often begins with what is the child's interest. We have students young enough that they don't really understand the breadth or depth of topics in a certain area. But I can give you a great example. Had a young lady, she's written on and presented last year in 2 or 3 conferences about Monte Carlo simulations, mathematical modeling that's often used in aerospace. And so she emails me and says, I want to extend this idea. I'm looking for some other topics. And then I pointed her into a sort of a research lane to consider. And now we have been iterating in the last couple of days her topic. And she said, oh, I'm very interested in because the Earth is not a perfect sphere. What about gravitational differences and their impact on orbits with CubeSats? Something along that line. And then I replied back to her today. I said, well, the thing that you didn't consider correctly is that you're presuming that the mass of the Earth is distributed uniformly. And I said, it's not. And that actually impacts the little local gravity that a CubeSat will feel. So what I'm trying to do is help her tune her idea and help her get a better understanding of the atmospheric orbital conditions of our CubeSat so that she can really fine-tune her research question, if you will, to what will become a great abstract in a paper. So I have no doubt. So today she's digging into atmospheric drag and solar pressure, the pressure exerted by the sun itself on our satellites. And now we're helping her develop her interest into an idea that would be suitable and acceptable for conferences.
So obviously these are not just like broad areas of interest. Within something broad, you have to help them come up with something more specific to focus on that's going to be at the level. I know that there are educational conferences as well as, the more aerospace or science conferences that you have. But if you have a student who's listening, how do you explain to them how they get their writing to that level? Because, as a person who works with them, right, a lot of times I see students who they're giving their best effort, but they've never really written at this kind of level before. So how do you end up getting kids who are willing to work at these research ideas and create an abstract, but to ultimately turn that into a paper?
I think, again, if a young person is curious, then you help guide them by continuing to ask questions. Another example, a young man, and he's actually in Pennsylvania, and he's, as far as I know, the only student we've ever had on our team that is a pole vaulter. And he emailed and he goes, I'm interested in near space objects, near Earth objects, NEOs, and how we might use CubeSats. Well, the right question to help, questions to sort of guide him down that path are, what are the limitations of a CubeSat as far as finding something, tracking something, etc. So helping him take his question and then bring it into the real world with, say, constraints and limitations of our satellite size that we work with. Those are often ways to help keep them going down that path.
Well, as the person who ends up working on the papers with the students, one of the things that I would say if you had a student who was interested in doing this is it really does require a lot of back and forth and editing, and a student has to be very much prepared to write in advance, to write at a level, and to be challenged and be told that it's got to be rewritten a couple times. It goes through several edits long before they even begin thinking about creating a presentation for a conference. So I would imagine that it's helpful that you have multiple people who can kind of assist in that process to get a student ready to be on an international stage. So speaking of other conferences, you mentioned like the Hawaiian conference, which is an educational one. You have a student there. You have another educational conference that I believe that it's not just that we are attending, but another student is as well. Do you want to take a moment to talk about the END conference?
Well, that's all the way in June. There are actually several events between February or January and June. But
Well, I was just talking about the educational conferences of paper
Yes,
writing
at
versus
the-
the others. So it might be a good time to bring it up.
at the end of June is the International Conference on Education and New Developments. And it's actually the end of June in Budapest, Hungary. And we do have 2 papers accepted, and that's a new conference for us. It's relatively new conference, and it's our first time presenting there. So it'll be interesting, and we get to visit yet another country. So that's something we are looking forward to. And I would say that the 2 papers that have been accepted are along the lanes of how do you build these aerospace teams in a novel way that makes them effective and ready to join the 21st century STEM workforce.
Well, by all means, jump back into the list. I figured, for the sake of time, we probably
So-
won't have to hit every one of them in every month, but
So a big event, if you want to see Wolfpack students in action in different capacities, in February, we have the National Engineering Week. That week is always the week that contains George Washington's birthday. And this year we'll be exhibiting at the Kravis Center again through the Business Development Board National Engineering Week banquet.
is that at the Kravitz Center? I thought it was at the
Well,
conference center across the way. That's the convention center, isn't it?
Right, it's at the Kravis Center at the Convention Center. It actually has been in both locations. So there at or near Kravis will be the banquet. Then in March, we have a number of great things happening. We're going to have 2 of our advocacy events, our big annual advocacy events in Tallahassee. The first one, it'll be our first time attending Palm Beach County Days. And then the week later, in mid-March, we'll be with Florida Space Day. And that's an important time for us to really try to drive home our PROPS request. And then finally, near the end of the month, we have the Pocket Cube Conference in Glasgow, Scotland, where one of our young students is going to be presenting a paper on our first Pocket Cube satellite we're building. So then in the spring, I do want to highlight one thing. We have a new group of students at the Suncoast High School, and they'll be launching their first high-altitude balloon mission, and they're developing 2 payloads there. We'll also put some Wolfpack hardware on there. And again, Eglonsat, our team in Switzerland, will be...
Suncoast High School is in West Palm Beach, Florida, for those listeners who aren't familiar.
Yes, and our Swiss team, the Eglon team, will be launching a high-altitude balloon as soon as I was told that avalanche conditions subside. They have so much snow this year, they're worried about trying to recover their hardware downrange in the Alps. They're worried about the avalanches, so they're waiting for the snow banks or something about the snow to make the conditions safer to recover their hardware. And so then in June, just to let you know, there's a big conference in Orlando, the International Space Development Conference. You'll see Wolfpack students will be there. And then we'll be ready for summer camps in July, and then we head into the fall season. So a lot going on this year.
Right. Well, I know that your trimester starts, like you have courses or trimesters that meet for the whole year, and that the newest terms is really start in August. But if someone's listening and it's January and they want to find out more, there's still time to get involved, yes?
Yes, of course.
So the best way to maybe find out about that would be to be reaching out, through the contacts either at my email address, which is schristenson at aerospace, aerospace -policy, policy.org. But you can also, of course, see that in the show notes and, of course, where you see the podcast information. So I'd visit the website, as we said in the intro, and the website will also put you in contact with us as well. Well, that was a lot, Kevin, and I know that you have a lot of other things that we didn't get to today, but we look forward to bringing the podcast back regularly. And is there anything else you want to add before we close?
No, no, except for just the final statement that the Wolfpack, we're continuing to design, build, and fly satellites. Hopefully, our 4th satellite will fly late this year, but we already have students working on the 5th and 6th. So if you want to get involved at the ground level on designing and seeing something that you build go to space, please contact us.
Well, if you've listened to any of our former podcasts, we know that we always end the same way. So we hope that you'll join us next time when we say, let's go to space.